this amendment is about the property tax assumption in the underlying bill and what's called local effort assistance funds. And what it would do is essentially roll off the property taxes and assumption in the bill and take away that LEA funding and instead do something that the underlying budget really doesn't do, which is put more money into material supplies and operating costs in our schools. Mr. Speaker, of course you know that K-12 education is our paramount duty. And when we're talking about budget priorities and priorities of government, what's important to realize is that K-12 education is our constitutional paramount duty, and that underfunding those types of things like material supplies and operating costs are actually doing significant harm to our schools. And of course, our schools and our local governments are having to deal with a little bit of inflationary pressure and maybe some policy pressure from policies passed here in Olympia onto our local governments and our schools in the form of unfunded mandates and so many other different things. But Mr. Speaker, the most harmful, in my opinion, part of this budget proposal is the assumption of a property tax that could go up from what we have in statute right now, which is a 1% annual adjustment, to up to as high as a 3% annual adjustment, and then also allow our schools to double the amount that they could pull in levies. And Mr. Speaker, I've been told over and over and over again this session that we need to raise progressive revenues. Well, this is not a progressive revenue, Mr. Speaker. This is a regressive property tax, and it's not on the wealthy. Mr. Speaker, both of us pay property taxes, and I know for a fact we're not wealthy people. This is a tax on the backs of hardworking Washington families. It will crush the middle class, and when combined with other proposals such as rent control, will absolutely ensure that rents always go up to the highest amount allowable in the cap. Now, Mr. Speaker, property taxes like this, I mentioned that local governments have some inflationary pressures, but you know who else has inflationary pressures, Mr. Speaker? Our families at home, our senior citizens, our retirees who are on fixed incomes, who had to try to budget to pay for property taxes on homes they already own. And this is going to send people out onto the streets if we pass this property tax proposal. And we did some back of the napkin math, Mr. Speaker. Your property taxes could double, maybe even triple in just the next 10 to 13 years. That is an astronomical level of growth to help out government on the backs of hardworking middle-class Washingtonians. And it will also harm those who are lower income as well if they seek to rent and their rents go up as a result of the movement of property taxes that people, housing providers, have to assume. This proposal, we didn't even have to do it. Between the BSA, the rainy day fund, as some people call it, and the end fund balance of over $3 billion at the end of the 4-year outlook, you have a total reserve of $6 billion or more at the end of the 4-year outlook, and we raise property taxes? That's not helping people who need us the most. I was told that if we don't raise progressive revenues, then people will die. We will leave people behind. But that's exactly what proposals like this do, this property tax. And we've been told if we don't raise property tax, well, how are we going to fund our schools? Well, it's actually kind of odd, Mr. Speaker, because right now we've never invested more money into our public schools than in our state's history than we do at this very moment. 3 times that of inflation, and by the way, some of the lowest outcomes in 3 decades in reading, math, and science. But we need to raise more property taxes? No, we don't actually need to do that. We can accept this amendment, we can roll off the property taxes, and we can fund material supplies and operating costs in our schools. Mr. Speaker, if the The reason that we have a budget deficit was a totally predictable set of consequences based on decisions that happened here in Olympia over the last handful of years. The point is that we don't need to we shouldn't be raising property taxes on everyday Washingtonians to use them as a bailout fund for negligent decision making that happened in the past and is continuing to happen right now. We should roll off this property tax, say no to increased property taxes, make sure that we actually do something that's more affordable for the people of Washington State so that they actually can afford to live here. So many of my constituents have emailed and talked and called me to say, please don't raise this property tax. It's going to put me out of my home. Senior citizens who are 70, 80 years old. Mr. Speaker, what are we going to do? We're not doing anything for those people in the underlying budget. We actually take money away from nursing homes and Medicaid and so many other different things. And then we want to combine that with policies like rent control, which when acting together with an increase in property tax would be absolutely devastating to housing supply in our state. Mr. Speaker, please vote no on increased property taxes and say yes to helping our schools, which are failing in many of our districts financially right now.